I first saw the message while sitting alone in my study, surrounded by neatly stacked financial binders and the soft hum of my old brass desk lamp. It was a Friday evening just past 8, and I had been reviewing quarterly performance summaries for one of my smaller enterprises, a mid-sized logistics firm I'd quietly rehabilitated over the last 2 years. My eyes were tired, my tea had gone cold, and I was moments away from shutting everything down for the night. Before we continue, check if you are subscribed to the channel, and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. Then my phone chimed, the cheerful little melody my daughter insisted I use for family chat notifications. It was a sound I'd always associated with warmth, with weekend brunch plans or photos of my grandchildren from my eldest child, but that night it carried something else entirely. A message that would slice through my calm like a blade. Hi everyone, quick update for Sunday's cookout. Eleanor, please don't come. You'll only make things tense like last time. Hope you understand. It was signed by Lucas Harmon, my son-in-law of nearly 3 years. A man I had once politely tolerated for my daughter's sake. And as if those words weren't humiliating enough, I watched the digital reactions appear one by one. A heart from Lucas's younger sister. A thumbs up from his father. A laughing emoji from his mother. And then my daughter. My own daughter, Claire, the child I had raised alone for more than 3 decades after losing my husband far too young, added a quiet supportive like. As if dismissing me from a family gathering one I helped organize every single year was nothing more than a minor scheduling adjustment. For a moment, I simply stared at the glowing screen while the room seemed to tilt. I remembered tying Claire's shoes for her first day of school, sitting up through the night during her teenage heartbreaks, paying her college tuition when scholarships fell short, helping with her down payment when she and Lucas insisted homeownership was part of their long-term plan. Now, I was a problem, a disruption, an inconvenience to be politely uninvited, as if my presence threatened the fragile balance of their backyard festivities. I typed out several potential replies, explanations, defenses, gentle reminders of all I had given and all I had refrained from saying over the years. But each line felt beneath my dignity, too small for the woman I had become. So I sent only 4 words. Understood. Enjoy your weekend. I set the phone down. I breathed. And then in the stillness of that dimly lit room, another understanding settled into me with the steady precision of a closing ledger. Lucas had just made a grave miscalculation. Not because he had wounded my pride, though he had certainly done that. No, his mistake was far simpler, and far more consequential. He had no idea I owned the company he had been bragging about working for these last several months. No idea that every quarterly sales report, every customer service audit, every internal complaint bearing his name passed across my desk. And absolutely no idea that by Sunday morning, he would be sitting directly across from me in an office he had never seen, explaining why he believed I was a burden to my own family. After the sting of that message dulled, though never fully disappeared, I returned to my laptop. But it wasn't the logistics firm's reports I opened again. No, I navigated to a different directory, one tucked inside a private encrypted folder labeled only with the name of my holding company, Whitmore Lane Enterprises. Within that folder sat the complete personnel records for a business I had quietly acquired roughly half a year earlier. Harbor and Holt Motors, a once struggling automotive dealership on the outskirts of Westbridge. Before my acquisition, the business had been limping along for nearly 4 consecutive years, mismanaged by an owner who refused to adapt to a changing sales landscape. When he finally approached me desperate, worn, and practically begging for a buyout, I purchased the entire operation for far less than its actual land value, already envisioning the turnaround strategy. It had been one of my most efficient deals. And it was where Lucas had been working for the last several months. I clicked on his digital employee file. It opened with a soft chime, revealing a series of neatly organized folders inside. Performance metrics, attendance logs, HR notes, customer feedback, and one tab labeled simply incidents. I took a slow, steady breath, then read. Consistently in the lowest 10% of the team month after month. Not a temporary slump. Not a learning curve. A pattern. An abysmal 26%, compared to our dealership average of 89%. Several clients specifically listed him by name as the reason they purchased elsewhere. Multiple female colleagues had submitted quiet but clear concerns regarding his tone, dismissiveness, and patronizing manner, particularly toward women who asked questions he deemed basic. One line in a colleague's review lingered in my mind. "He treats every woman like she's wasting his time." I recognized that behavior. I had witnessed that exact cadence of condescension in the way he often spoke to Claire, softening his sharpness only when others were watching. 15 unapproved absences in roughly 6 months. Always with excuses. Never with documentation. Declined required training modules. Skipped optional workshops. Ignored mentorship requests from the management team. And then there was the newest report, entered only 4 days earlier. A woman named Dr. Marisol Avery, a mechanical systems engineer with more than 2 decades of experience, had recorded that Lucas had talked over her repeatedly and suggested she return with someone who understood the technical side. She left the premises, purchased from a competitor, and posted identical complaints across 3 major platforms. The moment I read her name, I remembered her. I had met Dr. Avery at a conference several years earlier. Brilliant mind. Clear communicator. The kind of customer any sales rep should treasure. Lucas instead insulted her intelligence. As I scrolled through the last of the reports, I felt no vindictive thrill. Only a clarity, clean and cool, like winter air entering a warm room. Lucas had been on the edge of termination long before he decided to broadcast his disrespect of me to the entire family. His message didn't create his downfall, it merely illuminated it. Still, the timing added a poetic symmetry that was hard to ignore. Because what Lucas didn't know, what had never once crossed his mind, was that he had a mandatory meeting on Sunday morning. My assistant had scheduled it earlier that week under the neutral subject of quarterly performance oversight, with upper management. Lucas had never met the new owner of Harbor and Holt Motors. I had ensured my presence remained invisible during the transition, funneling directives through the general manager, and keeping my signature off day-to-day communications. Anonymous leadership often reveals the truest behaviors of employees. And tomorrow the anonymity would end. I closed the files, took one long sip of now lukewarm tea, and allowed myself a brief moment to feel something, not quite satisfaction but justice taking its first shape. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was from Claire. "Mom, I hope you're not taking Lucas's message too personally. He just wants a smaller gathering so everyone can relax. We can do something with you another weekend." The careful softness of it, the way she bent herself into gentler shapes to excuse him, it told me everything I had feared but never wanted to say aloud. Lucas hadn't merely isolated me from Claire. He had reshaped Claire's understanding of me, of family, without her noticing. I wrote back simply, "Of course, sweetheart. Have a lovely time." And I meant it. Because by the next morning, Lucas would discover that the woman he so casually dismissed was the same one who approved his salary, monitored his performance, and controlled his professional future. Actions always carry consequences. Lucas was about to meet his. Sunday morning arrived with an overcast sky that looked almost bruised, heavy, gray, and waiting to burst. Fitting, I thought, as I pulled into the employee lot behind Harbor and Holt Motors a full hour before the scheduled meeting. The dealership was nearly silent on weekends, with only a facilities tech in the service bay and an older security guard doing his slow laps around the building. I entered through the executive entrance and walked down the empty hallway toward the corner office few employees had ever set foot inside. It was a room filled with warm walnut furniture, tall bookshelves lined with business case studies, and a sweeping window view of the lot. Lucas, of course, had never been in here. He likely imagined the space belonged to some aloof male investor who peeked in only for quarterly numbers and holiday bonuses. I settled behind the desk and reviewed Lucas's termination documentation one more time, not out of hesitation, but out of discipline. Every name, every note, every time-stamped complaint had been verified and properly recorded. The paperwork was complete down to the final period. By 9:25, I heard footsteps in the outer office. Then voices. Lucas's voice carried first, loud and falsely confident. "Yeah, I'm here to meet with. What's his name again? The new exec." I figured Claire should come too, so she can see the place I've been helping turn around. My assistant's pleasant tone followed. "Mr. Harmon, the owner will see you shortly." "The owner?" Lucas repeated, confusion edged with impatience. I thought the new boss was just some corporate director from up north. No, sir. The owner is Mrs. Whitmore. Silence. Then a scoff. The owner is a woman? That explains the new oversight rules. Women managers always overcorrect everything. My assistant didn't reply to the comment not because she didn't hear it, but because professionalism requires deliberate stillness in moments like these. The footsteps resumed. Claire's heels clicked softly beside Lucas's heavy stride. I heard him take one more breath of manufactured self-assurance, the kind he often adopted before trying to appear smarter than he was. I raised my voice just enough to be heard. Come in. The door opened. Lucas stepped inside with the puffed chest of a man who believed he knew where the power in a room resided. Claire followed, trying to take everything in at once, the office's size, the view, the atmosphere that hummed with quiet authority. And then both of them saw me. At first, their faces reflected simple confusion, then dawning realization, then shock pure and unfiltered, as if the floor beneath them had shifted without warning. Eleanor. Claire whispered, breath catching as she stepped forward slightly. Lucas turned pale in a way I had only seen once, the time he tripped into a frozen pond on a winter hike. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, wordless. I gestured to the two chairs across from me. Please sit. We have important matters to discuss. Neither moved for a heartbeat. Then Claire began to lower herself shakily into a seat. Lucas remained standing, his face a storm of disbelief and growing anger. What are you doing here? He finally stammered. I own this company, Lucas, I replied calmly, and I have owned it for roughly half a year. He blinked rapidly. No, that's impossible. You're Claire's mother. You're retired. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. I retired from public-facing consulting, Lucas. Not from business. I slid the first page of his performance file toward him. And as part of my ownership responsibilities, I review every employee's metrics and conduct. Claire leaned forward, reading the heading with widening eyes. She looked from the paper to me, then to Lucas, confusion slowly shifting into something far more painful. You mean all this time? She whispered. Yes, I answered gently. All this time. Lucas snatched the paper as if hoping it would reveal some trick. This is a setup, he snapped. You bought this company to meddle in our marriage. To spy on me. I bought this company because it was profitable, I corrected. Your employment was incidental. And your performance was the problem, not your marriage. He shook his head vigorously. No, this is retaliation for the cookout message. You're firing me because I told you not to come. The documentation predates your message by months. I pulled forward a series of reports, customer complaints, attendance logs, HR notes, and arranged them neatly in front of him. Your behavior toward customers, particularly women, has been consistently unprofessional. Your sales numbers fall below required thresholds. You have refused mandatory training. And yesterday's message simply revealed something your performance had already made clear. You struggle to respect women, especially those who challenge your assumptions. Claire covered her mouth with her hand. She looked between us, her gaze moving slowly from the paperwork to Lucas's trembling posture. Lucas, she whispered, voice cracking. You told me management loved you. You said you were one of their top performers. Lucas shot her a sharp look. Claire, don't start with this. Your mother is twisting everything. I am presenting verified documentation, I said quietly. Your wife is free to read every line. Lucas's eyes darted wildly. His breath grew uneven. This is insane, he muttered. You're doing this to embarrass me. No, I answered. I'm doing this because it is my duty as the owner to address underperformance and misconduct. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that settles only when truth has nowhere left to hide. Lucas continued to stand, shoulders tight, fists clenched at his sides, not in courage, but in panic disguised as arrogance. I'd seen that posture many times throughout my career, the stance of a man whose confidence was built entirely on the assumption that no one would ever question him. I folded my hands neatly on the desk. Lucas, I said, keeping my voice steady, we need to discuss your employment. As of this morning, your position at Harbor and Holt Motors is terminated for cause. Claire inhaled sharply, an audible tremor in her breath. Lucas's head snapped toward her, as though he expected her to shield him, to counter my decision, to play the loyal wife who absorbed his version of events without question. "Claire," he said urgently, "tell her she can't do this. Tell her this is a conflict of interest. You're her daughter. This is illegal." But Claire didn't speak. She looked frozen, staring down at the pages in front of her as though each line rearranged the last several months of her life. I slid the official termination letter forward, cream paper, crisp edges, my signature written with deliberate precision. "Your termination includes continuation of health coverage for 30 days, I said, "and compensation for unused vacation. Given your documented violations, this is more generous than your file warrants." Lucas slapped his palm on the desk. "This is insane. You're using your money and your company to sabotage me because I don't kneel to you." "Kneeling has never been the issue," I replied evenly. "Respect has." I pointed to the most recent report, Dr. Avery's complaint. "Your behavior toward this customer was dismissive, condescending, and explicitly biased. She is a mechanical systems engineer with decades of experience in her field. You told her to bring someone who understood the technical side. She did return with a legal representative who filed a notice with our corporate office." Claire's hand flew to her mouth. "Lucas, you told me she was confused and emotional about pricing." "She was," Lucas barked. "Women get overwhelmed by big purchases. I was trying to help her." Claire slowly lowered her hand, and her eyes, my daughter's eyes, fixed on him with a clarity that stilled the room. "Lucas," she whispered, "I am a woman. Do you think I'm overwhelmed by big decisions?" Lucas opened his mouth, then hesitated. His expression shifted, anger replaced by a flash of calculation. "That's different, Claire. You're my wife. And Dr. Avery is someone's colleague, someone's boss, someone's wife," I said quietly. "Yet you treated her as though she were incapable." He turned back to me, eyes burning. "You're not doing this for the company. You're doing this because you're threatened by me." "Threatened?" I repeated gently. "Lucas, I run an enterprise portfolio valued at more than $200 million. You sold 5 cars last month. I assure you, your existence is not threatening." Claire closed her eyes, as though absorbing each word into a new, uncomfortable understanding. Lucas's jaw tightened. "You've been waiting for a chance to take me down," he insisted. "Ever since you bought this place. You've been spying on me, judging me." "I've been evaluating you," I corrected. "The way any employer evaluates an employee. The fact that you equate evaluation with persecution says more about your work ethic than it does about me." His voice rose. "You expect me to believe this has nothing to do with the cookout message?" I leaned back, hands still folded. "That message revealed your character clearly, but your performance record stands entirely on its own." Claire finally spoke, a small, trembling voice that carried more strength than she likely realized. "Lucas, why didn't you tell me any of this?" He spun toward her. "Because it's exaggerated, twisted. She's doing this to turn you against me." "She's not turning me against you," Claire whispered, tears beginning to gather beneath her lashes. "You are." Lucas stepped closer to her, lowering his voice to the tone he often used when trying to steer her emotions. "Claire, sweetheart, you know your mother wants to control everything we do. She's always tried. She throws her success in our faces. She offers help so she can hold it over us." "No," Claire said quietly. "She offers help because she loves me. You're the one who convinced me that her help was dangerous." Lucas reached for her hand, but she pulled it back gently. "You told me management was impressed with you," she said. "You told me you were one of the top performers. But all of this," she gestured weakly toward the paperwork spread across the desk. His face hardened. "So you're taking her side." "I'm reading the truth," she said, barely audible. For one fleeting moment, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in Lucas's eyes, fear not of losing a job, but of losing control. He turned back to me. "You're destroying my life." "No," I replied, voice soft but firm. "You built your life on lies and arrogance. I am simply ending your employment based on documented behavior." Claire exhaled shakily, as though some invisible weight had been lifted only to be replaced with a heavier, more painful one. "Lucas," she whispered, How long have you been lying to me? He didn't answer. His silence was an answer of its own. I gathered the paperwork, tapping it gently into alignment. Security will accompany you to collect your belongings, I said. Your access badges and company phone will be deactivated immediately. Lucas stared at me. His chest heaved. His breath hissed between clenched teeth. Then quietly, dangerously quietly, he said, "This isn't over." I held his gaze. "It is." He turned and stormed out of the office, the glass door trembling in his wake. Claire remained seated, shoulders slumped, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I didn't reach for her. I simply waited. And after several long seconds, she whispered, "Mom, I think I've been blind." "No," I said softly. "You've been trusting." Her breath hitched. "That's the same thing." I reached out and gently placed my hand over hers. "No, my love. One can be corrected. The other is a flaw. And you are not flawed." She wept quietly. And the real unraveling had only begun. I expected pushback. Any decisive business choice involving a family member tends to produce noise. What I did not expect was how quickly Lucas would transform embarrassment into a campaign. By Monday morning, my assistant brought me a summary of several worrying developments. He had begun calling former colleagues, painting his termination as an act of personal vengeance. He sent screenshots of the family group chat to a handful of employees with a caption that read, "When your boss's family watch your job." He posted a thread on a local neighborhood forum, implying that powerful businesswomen use their money to ruin men. The tone shifted from defensive to threatening within a single day. There were messages left for Claire on social platforms accusatory, flamboyant, the kind of public self-victimization that seeks to draw allies rather than reasoned responses. He sent text messages to my phone as well. One read, "You'll regret what you did. People like you have enemies." Another, more polite but no less insistent, begged Claire to see past what I had done, framing himself as the betrayed husband rather than the dismissed employee. My legal counsel advised me to document everything. We saved screenshots, recorded timestamps, and logged incoming calls. We prepared a factual summary of the termination process and the extensive documentation supporting it. I did not venture into social media theatrics. That was Lucas's medium. Mine was records and procedure. By midweek, a few employees had indeed reached out to my office, some in confusion, most in private relief. Several women from the sales floor sent messages to my assistant thanking us quietly for addressing behavior they had feared complaining about. One senior account manager wrote, "We can breathe easier now." That word breathe felt like payment for months of watching small irritations accumulate into a culture of guarded silence. Then came the evening that convinced me we had crossed a dangerous line. At 10:23 p.m. my home security app flashed an alert. A vehicle was parked at the end of my long drive. A man was walking toward my porch. I lived in a quiet lane with good lighting and a modest front garden. My neighbors were the sort who knew each other by first names and held onto teaspoons for each other's tea. I had never before felt the need to call the police for a visitor to my house. I peered through the window and saw Lucas on my porch, his posture agitated, one hand in his jacket pocket as if to steady himself. He knocked sharply, repeatedly. He called out my name in a voice that alternated between pleading and fury. My phone buzzed at the same moment. Claire had texted, "Mom, Lucas is at your house. I told him not to come. What should I do?" Her message trembled with the raw fear of someone watching the man they love unravel. I did not open the door. Instead, I called the non-emergency line while my assistant contacted our security liaison, and my attorney informed the local precinct of the situation. The dispatcher promised officers would be dispatched and advised me not to engage. I stood behind the door, watching through the window as Lucas paced, his voice growing louder, drawing a small crowd of curious neighbors. When the officers arrived, they moved with the calm efficiency of professionals who had seen this pattern before. A workplace dispute mutated into personal escalation. They spoke with Lucas at length, then with Claire at my side through an open doorway as she explained their separate positions. The officers explained the distinction between civil remedies for wrongful termination and criminal harassment or trespass. They issued a clear warning: leave the property and do not return. Lucas lingered in the street, arms folded, mouthing accusations. He looked up at my living room window as if searching for an audience. I remember thinking, with a cold, clinical clarity, that this was not the man who had once courted my daughter with small, earnest gifts. This was a man for whom losing control meant public performance. Later that night, Claire sat in my sitting room, the lamplight soft on her face, trembling but composed. We did not speak for a long time. She wrapped her hands around a mug and let the silence hold us. "Mom," she said finally, "I thought he'd calm down. I thought this was all about pride." "It's never only about pride," I answered. "It's about what happens when someone who has been allowed to evade accountability suddenly encounters consequences. Some people retreat. Others react." She stared at the mug as though seeing the years of her own life reflected in its curved glaze. "What if he goes further?" she asked. "Then we do what we've already begun," I said. "We document. We notify authorities when necessary. We take restraining measures if his behavior escalates. We protect you and the company, and we let the law take its course." Over the next several days, Lucas amplified his allegations. He filed an initial complaint with the Employment Commission and engaged counsel. His filings were accompanied by public statements on social channels where he framed his dismissal as a dangerous example of familial overreach in corporate governance. Our legal team moved with methodical speed. We provided the Commission with the personnel files, written warnings, signed training refusals, documented customer complaints, and copies of the termination letter. We forwarded the threatening messages to the police and requested that any further attempts at contact be routed through counsel. At the dealership, the internal mood continued to improve. Sales numbers began edging upward. Women on the floor expressed an ease that translated into confidence with customers. The chain reaction small at first began to prove the underlying point. Accountability, when applied fairly and transparently, restores professional cultures more than it destroys lives. Meanwhile, at home, I slept with my porch light on for several nights. Claire stayed over intermittently, each visit another opportunity for the quiet, honest conversations she had been putting off. The fabric of our relationship was being rewoven stitch by cautious stitch, no longer through the thin threads of tolerance but through the strong cord of mutual respect. And Lucas, well, he was learning, perhaps the hard way, that the consequences of certain choices ripple far beyond their intended targets. The lawsuit arrived like rain in late spring, expected, inconvenient, and something that required fast containment before it seeped into the foundation. It arrived by certified mail, thick with attachments, its envelope stamped with the sort of bureaucratic insignia that promised annoyance rather than surprise. Lucas's attorney filed an initial wrongful termination claim with the Regional Employment Commission, accompanied by a flurry of social media posts that attempted to reframe the narrative into one of persecution. His counsel alleged that family ties rendered the termination inherently suspect, and that the timing immediately after the cookout message looked retaliatory to a reasonable outside observer. The phrasing was clever enough to give surface-level credibility, but shallow enough that anyone with context could see the reach. We had anticipated all of it. For weeks before the termination, our legal team had quietly assembled a structured timeline. 6 months of performance metrics, coaching plans, customer complaints with timestamps, screenshots from customer service platforms, verbatim manager notes, and signed written warnings acknowledging receipt. We had even included his refusal to complete the mandatory harassment training modules twice. Everything was cataloged, cross-referenced, and reviewed by 2 separate managers for accuracy. The weight of documentation was not meant to crush him. It was meant to make the truth impossible to distort. But what surprised me wasn't the filing itself. It was how the company responded. There was no panic scrambling down the halls or whispered side conversations. Instead, I saw a quiet, disciplined professionalism ripple outward. The general manager called a staff meeting within 24 hours, anonymized, transparent, and calm. He explained the process, outlined what an employment commission investigation entailed, and reassured employees that proper procedures had been followed. He encouraged anyone with knowledge or concern to come forward confidentially. That willingness to be open mattered more than any memo. Transparency replaced rumor before rumor had a chance to root. And rumor, as I had learned in the early days of dealership ownership, is a stubborn weed when fed silence. After the meeting, something shifted. A wave of quiet courage moved through the sales floor. Over the next week, several women, ones who had previously kept their distance from anything resembling conflict, stepped forward. They brought with them stories they'd never reported, not because the incidents weren't real, but because the cultural undertow once told them that complaints would lead nowhere. One longtime receptionist recounted how Lucas dismissed a customer's question as unfeminine curiosity, then laughed with a coworker as if belittling half the customer base was an inside joke. A junior sales associate admitted she'd once considered quitting after Lucas muttered that she didn't have the temperament for real negotiation in the middle of a floor meeting. She had swallowed the sting because she feared her complaint would be labeled petty. Their statements were not dramatic. They were precise, professional, heartbreaking in their ordinariness. The dealership's HR manager collected every statement, ensuring confidentiality protocols were followed to the letter. The women's courage created a chain reaction. Quiet support from colleagues, messages of solidarity exchanged after hours, the realization that speaking up did not jeopardize their standing. Within a fortnight, Lucas's attorney requested a meeting with our counsel, an unmistakable sign that the narrative he had been fed was beginning to collapse under scrutiny. The meeting, held in a neutral office downtown, lacked the theatrics television drama's love. There were no slamming folders, no raised voices. Only the sober, almost fatigued tone lawyers adopt when the facts speak louder than arguments. His attorney asked whether we had the training refusal documented. We slid over the signed forms. He asked if the complaint filed by Dr. Avery was corroborated. We handed him the customer service logs, platform screenshots, and a follow-up email timestamped 2 hours after the incident. He asked if supervisors had been consistent in their coaching attempts. We produced interview notes from 3 separate managers, all of which echoed the same concerns. With every page he turned, his posture shifted from defensive to pragmatic. At the end of the meeting, he closed his folder slowly, exhaled in the way professionals do when they realize a case is not a case at all, and said only, "I'll need to speak with my client." 2 weeks later, we received formal notice that he was withdrawing from representation. The letter, polite, firm, and impeccably structured, explained that after reviewing the evidence, counsel could not ethically pursue the claim. It was a small, quiet vindication, not the triumphant sort people imagine, but one rooted in the slow, steady strength of accurate records. Meanwhile, the dealership's atmosphere changed in unexpected ways. With Lucas gone, the air felt lighter, not euphoric, just breathable. Conversations flowed without guarded glances. Sales meetings contained fewer interruptions and more collaboration. Our female customers, who had previously hesitated before approaching certain desks, started to ask questions freely. Employees, especially new hires, grew increasingly confident in navigating customer interactions without worrying about being undermined. Sales numbers ticked upward. Net Promoter Scores among female customers improved. 1 month after his departure, our customer satisfaction index rose by approximately 30%. The shift wasn't because one man had been replaced by another. It was the environment, safer, quieter, more respectful, that began producing better work. Amidst this backdrop of incremental recovery, something else took root. Claire began visiting the dealership more frequently. At first, I thought she was checking in on the aftermath of Lucas's accusations. But her focus wasn't on him. It was on the work, the structure, the culture, the operations. She sat in on a management meeting and surprised everyone by asking incisive questions about demographic market trends. She read through market analyses with the careful, hungry intelligence I remembered from her academic years. "Mom," she said one afternoon, folding a financial summary across her lap, "if there's work to be done here, I want to help. Not to prove anything to Lucas, but because I think I can contribute something real." I looked at her, my daughter, who had spent months doubting her instincts in the name of preserving marital peace, and I felt something shift. Here was a woman rediscovering her professional voice. "We've been thinking about expanding our business development efforts," I said. "And there's another need, training and policy design focused on gender respect and customer interaction. You have the marketing background for it. You understand messaging. If you want to join, I'll support you." Her smile started as a small, cautious curve. Then it grew. Over the next several weeks, she approached her tasks with a steadiness that impressed even the seasoned managers. She audited customer feedback, analyzed demographic discrepancies, sat in on HR interviews, and made recommendations on onboarding modules. She introduced an idea for role-playing customer scenarios, identifying subtle cues that made women hesitate to ask questions. And slowly, the staff began to accept her not as the owner's daughter but as a capable professional in her own right. Outside the dealership, Lucas's online campaign dwindled. Without legal backing and facing mounting evidence to the contrary, his accusations migrated into smaller, less reputable corners of the internet echo chambers of people who confuse visibility with credibility. Some posts drew sympathetic comments from old acquaintances, but many responses grew skeptical as more information trickled out. The local reporter who had once sensed a scandal moved on when the Employment Commission closed the initial inquiry for lack of merit. News cycles favor conflict, not documentation. Without fuel, his story evaporated. Not everything resolved neatly. There were long nights of preparing responses, reviewing deposition notes, and comforting Claire during moments when guilt resurfaced. But the through line of it all remained simple. When documentation, courage, and institutional support align, the truth becomes durable. Accusations, however loud, eventually lose their echo. One quiet evening, after reviewing the latest customer satisfaction metrics in the small conference room with its humming fluorescent lights, Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown me the paperwork," she whispered. "You would have seen it eventually," I said. "You just needed the mirror at the right time." She laughed, a clear, bell-like sound that felt like the final clearing of fog, and then we bent together over the spreadsheets, stitching practical improvements into the fabric of the business. New training modules, a confidential reporting hotline, and a rotation schedule to ensure no single employee could dominate floor culture again. These were not sweeping, dramatic reforms. They were stitches in a larger repair. And in the quiet of that room, surrounded by metrics, paperwork, and a faint smell of industrial carpet cleaner, I felt something like hope take root. Time has a peculiar way of rearranging perspective. During the months that followed Lucas's departure, life became a mixture of paperwork, policy meetings, and the slow reknitting of emotional boundaries. The process was long in documentation but short, mercifully short in drama. The Employment Commission conducted its review with the deliberate care of professionals who understand that sloppy judgment creates legal ripples that can last years. They requested chronological summaries, interviewed key witnesses, and cross-checked every piece of evidence we had submitted. They asked for corroboration for even the smallest claims, and we provided it. Lucas attempted several new angles in his filings: accusations of hostility, insinuations of conspiratorial intentions, allegations of family bias. Each one dissolved against the weight of repeated, dated, and signed documents. Two outcomes emerged that clarified the public record. The first was the Employment Commission's formal dismissal of his wrongful termination claim. Their report, concise, unemotional, and blessedly free of subjective interpretation, stated that Harbor and Holt Motors had followed established disciplinary procedures, maintained appropriate records, and acted squarely within employment law. The language was almost clinical in its finality. It did not scold him. It simply dismantled every allegation with facts. Facts, in the end, are sturdier than rhetoric. The second outcome was more consequential, not for the business, but for public safety. Months earlier, I had spoken quietly with local law enforcement about concerning patterns in Lucas's behavior. At the time, they encouraged documentation but explained they would need multiple corroborative reports before escalating matters. I understood. Systems move slowly and often for good reason. But over the following months, more reports surfaced. Former colleagues described late-night calls after the termination, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. A neighbor reported unusual visits and unsolicited discussions about being targeted. A property manager documented aggressive complaints unrelated to the dealership, but consistent with escalating agitation. Taken individually, they were concerning. Taken together, they formed a pattern. Eventually, officers compiled a case file substantial enough to move forward. Lucas was charged with multiple counts related to harassment and stalking, not the sensational sort that fill headlines, but the more common, insidious kind that escalate when unaddressed. He pled to a reduced set of charges and agreed to court-mandated counseling, a restraining order, and supervised probation. It was not dramatic justice, but it was meaningful justice, one rooted in protecting potential victims and requiring genuine behavioral reform. I did not take satisfaction in his consequences. I never had. What I felt was relief, a quiet alignment between truth, accountability, and public safety. At the dealership, signs of recovery became increasingly visible. Within 3 months, our customer satisfaction index rose another 30%. Sales stabilized and then began an upward climb. Female customers reported feeling respected and heard. Employees described the workplace as less charged, more professional, actually enjoyable again. One manager told me the workplace felt like it exhaled. We implemented new policies, a mandatory behavior and respect training, led by a certified third-party instructor, a confidential reporting hotline with guaranteed anonymity, a documented progressive discipline steps that removed ambiguity, a rotating supervisory model to prevent concentrated influence. Claire was instrumental in reshaping the customer experience modules. She introduced empathy exercises, scenario-based learning, and techniques that reposition customers, especially women, as informed collaborators rather than individuals to be lectured. Watching her walk the sales floor, sometimes coaching, sometimes simply listening, was a small redemption in motion. Outside the dealership, public perception shifted. Neighborhood forums that once amplified Lucas's claims now hosted discussions about workplace culture, the importance of documentation, and the personal cost of tolerating disrespect. Some voices expressed surprise at how easily initial assumptions had been overturned by evidence. There were dissenters, of course. A few people privately told Claire she had been harsh, that family ties should have softened consequences. One distant cousin even suggested we should have handled everything more gently. To them I would say quietly, firmly, gentleness without accountability is permission for repeated harm. Claire's name appeared in a few local interviews. She spoke carefully, without defensiveness or triumph, about learning to separate loyalty from truth. Trust isn't blind, she said in one article. It should be informed. I repeated that line to myself several times afterward. It captured what I had been trying to teach her through the long nights, the legal filings, the difficult conversations. Business results soon validated the moral argument. Respectful workplaces produce better outcomes. Customers reward professionalism. Employees thrive when the environment is safe. Our metrics mirrored the cultural shift we had worked so hard to implement. At home, the tension softened. Claire returned to her own work with steadier confidence. Our evenings, once strained by grief and confusion, transformed into moments of planning, laughter, and reluctant acknowledgement of growth born from discomfort. And Lucas, he faded from the center of our lives. His voice, once amplified by accusation, now carried less weight. Not because we silenced him, but because the truth had spoken louder. In the months that followed, Claire and I began building a new idea. A consulting arm within Whitmore Lane Enterprises, one focused on workplace respect and women's leadership development for small and mid-sized businesses. It grew from our experience, our mistakes, our painful lessons, our unexpected victories. It was a simple belief made into structure. If you build the systems you wish existed when you needed them most, you help others avoid the same harm. And so we began. Not with triumph, not with vindication, but with clarity, steadiness, and the quiet conviction that repair, when guided by accountability and compassion, is its own kind of justice. 2 years after Lucas's termination and after the dust of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval had settled into memory rather than daily burden, I stood at the front of a vast conference room inside the Westbridge Convention Center. The hall was filled with more than 300 women, entrepreneurs, mid-career professionals, recent graduates, and a small collection of seasoned executives who had flown in from neighboring states to attend our inaugural Whitmore Lane Women's Leadership Forum. Behind me, a soft amber glow illuminated the stage, and in front of me, the murmuring crowd carried a sound I had come to appreciate deeply. The low hum of people ready to learn, absorb, and grow. Claire stood at the side of the stage, clipboard tucked under her arm, headset perched neatly over her ear. She had spent months coordinating this event, organizing speakers, curating panel discussions, and designing workshop modules. She moved with confidence now, her gait unburdened by the second-guessing that had shadowed her during her marriage. Watching her, I felt a quiet, resonant pride ripple through me. As the moderator finished her introduction, I stepped to the podium. Good morning. I began, my voice amplified but steady. When I founded Whitmore Lane Enterprises nearly 15 years ago, I never imagined that one of our most impactful branches would be dedicated to women's professional empowerment. Yet here we are, because real leadership is often born from the moments that try us most. Several women in the front row nodded, their expressions reflective, perhaps carrying their own unspoken stories. I want to begin, I continued, by sharing a personal story, not because it is exceptional but because it is familiar. Many of you will recognize pieces of yourselves in it. I paused. That moment, the quiet intake of breath among the audience, was always the most intimate. 2 years ago, my son-in-law sent a message in our family group chat. A casual, dismissive line delivered with the ease of someone who assumed he held the authority to wound without consequence. A few soft laughs emerged, not mocking, but empathetic, understanding. He wrote, "Eleanor, don't come on Sunday. You'll make things tense." What he didn't know was that he was writing that message to the owner of the company he worked for. Soft murmurs rippled through the room, a blend of disbelief and recognition. The next morning, he walked into my office for what he believed was a routine performance meeting. Instead, he met the woman whose signature approved his paychecks. And more importantly, he met the evidence, months of it, that he had been underperforming, disrespectful to colleagues, and dismissive toward customers. I softened my tone, letting the story lean into its truth rather than its irony. This wasn't a tale of revenge, I said. It was a lesson about accountability, about how unexamined biases, especially toward women, break families, workplaces, and communities. Several audience members nodded, some taking notes. And it was also, I continued, a lesson about how manipulation can hide in plain sight. My daughter Claire spent nearly 3 years making herself smaller so her husband could feel larger. He convinced her that my success made me intrusive, that my advice was controlling, that my accomplishments were overshadowing their marriage. I glanced toward Claire. She met my eyes, and her small, steady smile said everything. What Lucas didn't anticipate was that truth, once revealed, has a way of clarifying everything around it. Claire ended her marriage. She rebuilt her confidence. And in the process, she discovered a passion for helping other women navigate the intersections between personal boundaries and professional ambition. The room erupted in applause, genuine, warm, sustained. Claire's cheeks flushed, but she remained poised. And that, I said as the applause tapered off, is how this division of Whitmore Lane Enterprises began. I motioned to Claire, who walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who had earned every moment of that spotlight. She began her portion of the keynote with a firm, clear voice. When I left my marriage, Claire told the audience, I thought I had lost everything. My sense of partnership, my certainty, my direction. But what I didn't realize was that manipulation doesn't just shrink your voice, it shrinks your sense of possibility. There was a collective exhale across the room. Some women touched their hearts. Others folded their arms as though steadying themselves against memories of their own. Claire continued, My mother didn't just show me documentation. She showed me what accountability looks like. And she taught me something I had never been encouraged to believe. That competence is not a threat. It is a responsibility. A hum of agreement rose from the crowd. This summit, she said, gesturing around the room, is for every woman who has ever been told she is too ambitious, too direct, too emotional, too strong, to anything. Here we rebuild. Here we take up space without apology. Applause returned rounder, louder. She closed with a line I had watched her write in the margins of her notebook weeks earlier. You are not too much. You have simply been measured by people who feared the magnitude of your potential. The room erupted. After the keynote, the day unfolded in panels about negotiation, workshops on workplace boundary setting, and sessions on identifying subtle manipulation before it calcifies into something destructive. In the afternoon, attendees formed circles to discuss their experiences in small groups. Stories of bosses who took credit, partners who minimized achievements, colleagues who weaponized charm. Women leaned toward one another, forming new bonds over shared experiences and collective resolve. As the summit drew to a close, I stepped aside into a quiet lounge overlooking the city. Claire joined me, still glowing from adrenaline and gratitude. You know, she said, leaning on the balcony, I think we turned something very dark into something useful. Yes, I said softly. We did. And do you think, she continued, eyes lowered, that it would have happened without everything that came before? I hesitated, a deliberate hesitation. I think hardship often reveals what we might never have seen otherwise, I said. But we choose what to do with that revelation. You built something out of it. That is what matters. She nodded slowly. Then, she said, I think we're ready for whatever comes next. The city lights blinked like quiet affirmations. And somewhere far away in a different life entirely, Lucas was no longer shaping our story. We were. In the months that followed the summit, our women's leadership division, initially a quiet idea scribbled on the edge of a legal pad, grew into one of the most sought-after consulting programs in the region. What had begun as a modest effort to assist small businesses with respectful workplace practices blossomed into a full professional arm offering leadership coaching, policy development, and targeted training for women navigating new chapters in their careers. Claire, who once doubted her own instincts, was now being invited to speak at regional business associations, universities, and corporate retreats. She had become the face of the program not because she bore my name, but because she had earned the confidence of our clients. One afternoon, while reviewing our latest quarterly report in my office, I watched her from across the room as she facilitated a video seminar for a group of aspiring women entrepreneurs. Her voice, steady, warm, authoritative, belied the woman she had been only a couple of years earlier. The transformation was not cosmetic or performative. It was foundational. As she explained strategies for navigating manipulative feedback loops in professional settings, I noticed a quiet power in the way she spoke. She had lived through a version of that challenge, and now translated her experience into guidance that others could apply. She was no longer running from the past, she was using it. After the call ended, Claire closed her laptop and exhaled with a satisfied, slightly tired smile. You're helping people change their lives, I told her. She chuckled softly, leaning back in her chair. It feels strange sometimes, Mom. Not in a bad way. Just surreal. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be teaching executive women about boundaries and leadership, I would have thought they were confused. 3 years can teach more than 30, I said. If you're willing to listen. She grew thoughtful. I think the hardest part was forgiving myself for not seeing the signs with Lucas. I reached across my desk, placing my hand over hers. You didn't fail. You trusted someone who misrepresented himself. That isn't a flaw, it's evidence of your generosity. She nodded quietly, absorbing the sentiment without debate. Later that evening, after the building had emptied and the last of the winter light had faded from the windows, I received a message notification. It came through an unexpected channel. LinkedIn. A woman named Layla had reached out. Her message was brief, polite, and unassuming. Hello, Ms. Whitmore. I have recently become engaged to Lucas and came across your daughter's work. I was hoping to ask a few questions privately about what your family experienced. I want to be informed, not fearful. I stared at the message for several long seconds, not because it shocked me, but because it echoed something deeply familiar. The quiet plea of someone who sensed a shifting shadow and wanted clarity before committing her future to someone else's story. Claire walked back into my office carrying 2 cups of herbal tea. When she saw my expression, her brows drew together. What's wrong? I turned my monitor toward her. She read the message slowly, then set her cup down with a measured breath. Well, she said, I suppose he hasn't changed as much as he claimed. People often change their circumstances, I replied. Not always their character. She pulled up a chair and sat beside me. What should I say to her? Tell her the truth, I said. Without theatrics. Without embellishment. Without bitterness. Claire nodded. I can do that. She crafted a thoughtful response, respectful, concise, and centered on facts. She described Lucas's pattern of rewriting narratives to preserve control, the subtle emotional diminishment, the way he framed accountability as persecution, and his professional behavior that ultimately led to his termination. She did not insult him. She did not psychoanalyze him. She simply told the truth as she had lived it. When she hit send, she leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. I feel lighter, she whispered. Not because I want to sabotage anything in her life, but because I'm not hiding anymore. That's what freedom feels like, I said. 2 days later, Layla responded. Her message was short, almost painfully earnest. Thank you for your honesty. Your story helped me recognize things I had been rationalizing. I needed this clarity. I don't think I will be moving forward with the engagement. Claire sat quietly after reading it, sad, relieved, thoughtful, and resolute all at once. Mom, she said softly. Yes. I think that might be the first time I've helped someone avoid what I went through. I touched her shoulder. And it won't be the last. As winter deepened into early spring, our leadership division expanded into 3 neighboring states. We signed contracts with mid-size firms who wanted to strengthen their internal policies, and we partnered with 2 universities to offer internship programs for young women studying business administration and organizational leadership. One evening, while preparing materials for our newest workshop, Claire looked up from her stack of papers. You know, everything we're building came from something awful, but now it's helping so many people. Yes, I said, smiling at her. Some things break us so we can see what needs fixing. Some experiences aren't meant to be forgotten, they're meant to be transformed. We stood there in my office, surrounded by documents and training manuals and half-drafted policy proposals, and I realized something striking. We had finally reached the point in our story where Lucas was no longer a character, just a catalyst. The real story was us. When people ask me now what I learned from that tangled, painful chapter, I usually give them a clear, plain answer. Power without empathy corrodes trust. Accountability without mercy hums a different tune. But even that neat return to aphorism misses something important, something softer and more complicated. You cannot rebuild someone else. You can only offer them evidence, boundaries, and if they wish to accept it, a path forward. The rest is their work. In the months and years after the legal matters closed and the initial shock faded, Claire and I found our lives reshaped in more practical ways than either of us expected. Our evenings returned to a calmer rhythm. We cooked together more often. We critiqued copy and practiced presentation scripts in the living room. Sometimes we simply sat on the porch with cups of tea and let the world go by, savoring the small, companionable silences that grow only when trust is restored. Professionally, our work matured into something that felt more like vocation than reaction. Whitmore Lane's Women's Leadership Program expanded thoughtfully, focused on the things I had seen make the largest differences. Clear reporting channels, documented progressive discipline, and training that taught people how to listen before they judged. Our clients were often surprised not by the theory but by the practical ease of implementation. Respect, after all, is a set of habits more than a lecture. One autumn afternoon, nearly 3 years after the group chat that started it all, I walked across Harbor and Holt's freshly polished sales floor. A junior saleswoman no older than 24 greeted me with a bright, direct smile and asked if she could show me a new way she'd been handling technical questions with customers. She wanted to explain the vehicle's safety features in terms of usage scenarios rather than spec sheets. Her approach was practical, patient, and confident. When she finished, she looked at me as if she expected approval. "You're doing that beautifully," I told her. "You're teaching customers to think through choices rather than asking them to be passive." She blushed slightly and said, "I used to be afraid to ask questions. I thought it would make me seem inexperienced. Now customers actually thank me." That small exchange felt like confirmation that the cultural shift was real and durable. It was evidence that the work we had done, sometimes painfully, sometimes slowly, had changed how people treated one another in a place where they spent a third of their waking lives. Of course, not every story ends with tidy grace. People change in fits and starts. Some grow quickly. Others resist for reasons that sometimes have little to do with you. Lucas's life continued on its own, shaped by consequences that required him to look inward if he wanted a different outcome. I do not delight in that. I only note that accountability requires more than spectacle. It requires structures that invite genuine change. As for Claire, watching her evolve has been one of the clearest pleasures of my later years. She has become the kind of leader I had always known she could be: decisive, compassionate, and precise. She runs our training programs with an almost surgical clarity for what language and scenario will help learners shift behavior. When she speaks to clients about boundaries, she does so without bitterness. She speaks from experience and offers practical strategies rather than condemnation. That has made people listen. When we run a workshop now, I like to begin not with the dramatic bits, the termination, the court filings, the harrowing porch visit, but with the quiet pieces. The notes employees left thanking us for taking them seriously, the junior associate who finally admitted a complaint because she no longer feared reprisal, the customer whose return visit became a referral because she felt fully respected. Those small things are the mortar. They are what hold the building together long after the headlines fade. If I had to give one piece of advice to anyone watching this who suspects a pattern of manipulation in their life, personal or professional, it would be this: document calmly, seek counsel quietly, and when truth appears, do not be afraid to act. The enemy of accountability is ambiguity. When you leave things ambiguous, you give room for narratives to be rewritten by people more comfortable with distortion than with the facts. Trust, too, must be earned and re-earned. When Claire first read the files I had shown her, there was grief and disorientation. There was also gratitude for being given data rather than condemnations, for being treated like an adult capable of deciding how to respond. That is a generosity sometimes overlooked in more sensational retellings. As the conference lights dimmed in that first Whitmore Lane summit, Claire and I lingered on stage, watching clusters of women exchange business cards and ideas with the kind of ease I had hoped for when I bought that tiny, failing dealership years ago. I thought then, truly thought, that our choices had produced something larger than either of us. We had turned an act of public disrespect into a movement toward respect. We did not seek revenge. We sought repair. There is a difference. And when people ask whether I regret buying Harbor and Holt simply because it led to family turmoil, I answer, not at all. The acquisition was a calculated investment. The human consequences were unpredictable. But from the unpredictability came a new enterprise, one that protected employees, elevated customers, and offered women tools to navigate power dynamics with more clarity and less fear. There is another thing I want to say before I let the story rest. Power is not a thing you hoard. It is a responsibility. When you hold it, you must wield it with fairness, humility, and a clear set of rules that everyone can see. When you do, people recognize the structure, they feel safer, they can do their jobs better. And sometimes, in that safety, communities prosper. So to anyone who was waiting for a dramatic, poetic ending, there isn't one. The ending here is quieter. A woman who learned to trust her judgment again. A daughter who learned to read the facts. An organization that became healthier when it stopped tolerating small cruelties. These are not cinematic moments, but they are the ones that last. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. And if this story helps you recognize a pattern you've been downplaying, write it down. Gather your evidence and protect yourself. The world runs on facts. Sometimes demonstrating them is the kindest thing we can do for those we love.